Hey guys, my name is Colson Rosa, and welcome back to Seraphim Stories. So today I want to talk to you guys about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And this incredible novel is the second in our series of the Narnia books, which C.S. Lewis wrote, and just talking about some of the incredible things authors can learn from these books to hopefully apply to their writing. Now, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the second book in the series, but it's actually the first book that Lewis wrote when he was writing the Narnia novels. And in many ways, it's the centerpiece of the entire Narnia story. The Magician's Nephew, which came before it, was looking forward to and setting up this book. And in a lot of ways, though there are many other stories that are told in the Narnia series, they always refer back to, or to some extent at least look back to, what happened in this book. And in many ways, it's one of the most important stories because it sets the entire narrative in motion for the whole rest of the series. It's sort of the foundation upon which all of the other books in the series rest. And it's considered by many to be one of Lewis's best novels he ever wrote. And there's so many different incredible and rich details about this book. So I will say a little bit of a spoiler warning. Although I'm not going to be diving in specifically to every single scene and every single character within the book, I will be talking about a lot of elements of the book as we come to recognize what authors can then learn from it. So the first thing that I want to point out is the childlike wonder in this book. The sense of just awe and majesty about this world of Narnia that draws the reader in so naturally. There's a great balance of character moments, action to move the story forward, and just poignant descriptions that get right to the heart of what Narnia is as a place and as a land, a realm totally different to the children that enter it. And you get to see the intricacies of not only what the world is like, but even some of the ways that the world is run, some of the ways these creatures interact with each other, some of their history, some of their lore with each other. And you also get to see this beautiful magical world that still has its own flaws. It's by no stretch of the imagination a perfect world. And these flaws shine through most predominantly in some of the characters from Narnia, as well as the characters that come into Narnia from Earth, specifically from London. And we get multiple point of views on everything that we see. So different aspects of the story that are so important, like Aslan, for example, you're going to get more than one perspective on him, who he is, what he stands for, whether he can be trusted or not, what he fights for. And then we come to realize by the end of the book which notions of the characters we should have been siding with and should have been relating to most of all. And this brings me to my second point, which is layered characters. Lucy, for example, is innocent and sincere, and this really shines through, but she also is weaker than some of her siblings and misunderstanding in her youth. And these aren't necessarily bad things, but they are elements that can then hurt her ability to help in certain scenes sometimes, or can lead her astray in her emotions. She's an incredible character, someone we certainly want to root for. Sometimes we root for Lucy more than we root for any other of the Pevensey siblings, but we also recognize that she has her limits as well, and she desperately relies on them for things that she can't do. Mr. Tumnus, I think, is a fascinating character who gets introduced pretty early in the story, and then you don't see much of him again until the end of the story, but he's still important because of how much he means to Lucy and how she gets to tell her siblings about him as an introduction to Narnia and as a driving motivation for them to save him, to rescue him, since he has been turned to stone. Mr. Tumnus is heartbroken, but he's also honest and good. He's heartbroken because of the things he's done against Lucy and the ways he's acted terribly, almost feeling like he's betrayed his own people by siding with the White Witch. But then he shows in the end that he is honest and good. He does not turn Lucy in. He thought the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve would be terrible people, but in fact, they're wonderful people that he wants to help and support, and he knows he can't go through with what he promised to do for the White Witch. Peter then is concerned, loyal, and frustrated. His concern for his siblings and his loyalty to them is an excellent part of his character, and then it helps him so much more when in the end he becomes High King, that loyalty allows him to protect his people, and that concern gives him compassion that allows him to protect his people. But he also gets frustrated, especially with Edmund, for the things that are happening, and that frustration sometimes drives him to be very blunt with the characters that he meets. Susan, on the other hand, is sensible and mature, almost too much so. We'll see this in later novels, but her sensibility and maturity sometimes hinders her from having an imagination like she needs to in this world, trusting people more often when she wants to trust them, but what they're saying doesn't quite seem as logical to her. And then Edmund is a really fascinating character because even though he's so bitter, especially in the first half of the book, and his bitterness is one of his major character traits, by the end he's become not only regretful, asking for forgiveness for his actions, but also brave, saving the final battle in the end by destroying the wand of the White Witch that she has been using to turn people to stone. So we see these layered characters that have a lot of depth to each of them. And even though one might say Lucy is the main character, Lewis does such an incredible job developing so much more than just her. And that's something I really respect about him. And something that I've really thought through in my books. How you don't need to only develop the main character and let all of the other characters be cardboard cutouts, but you can develop them as well. Give them a lot of layers and intricacies and unique moments to shine, unique aspects about them that set them apart of what they want and need and love and hate. And these layered characters are ones that we more instantly gravitate toward because they're realistic, and ones that we then care about. So the next thing I want to talk about is interesting exposition. When Lewis is expositing parts of his story, which means sharing necessary information to the reader, he has a lot of different techniques he implements. One of them is just talking about others. So when information is needed on a character, he will sometimes just have some of the other characters discuss that specific character, what they think about him or her, what they maybe like or don't like, or what they're afraid of might happen to this character. And that can then inform the reader about the character almost secondhand, listening in on that conversation. Another techniques that he uses is just showing actions, showing that character's actions, or if there's more information needed about a certain part of the world, some of the actions that take place naturally show that misfortune has taken place or that thing needs to be changed. It will show an element of the world that has been built because the action takes you through that world. Something you have to overcome. Something that while you're going out on this adventure, you then notice because of what the characters are doing. Or even some of their actions then just naturally show tendencies of their heart. A third way that Lewis uses exposition is through history. So it's not just information about the present, but it's also information about the past and what has led up to the beginning of this story. The story didn't just come out of thin air, but it was built up through time in Narnia, and that's where the history comes in. And then, of course, the most familiar, probably, form of exposition is description, which could just be the author talking about directly the information needed to be known. But sometimes this is best done in bite-sized chunks, so the reader can process the amount of information needed and not feel overwhelmed by it or bored by it. And when this is layered in or mixed in with some of these other styles of showing interesting exposition, it makes it a lot easier to learn everything you need to learn as a reader. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that Lewis does so well is his use of style. Style is specific to every author, but it sets your book apart as your own compared to the works of other authors. And Lewis's style is very clear and distinct. He cares for his readers almost like a father. He doesn't try to force them into specific information, but he guides them along and it helps them to everything they need to know. Sometimes he'll talk directly to the reader, telling them, here's something you might need to know, or here's something you might have been curious about. And he'll go as far as answering their questions. Lewis will look at his book as a reader, take questions he feels the reader will probably have, and then directly tell the reader, hey, if you're going through this question, here's an answer to this question to help you out. And it's really interesting then reading the book, feeling like every once in a while there'll be this pause from the story itself where Lewis will then talk to you directly. And he'll try to help you out with any questions and concerns that you have. And I think that's a great note for this type of book because it's such a interesting balance of a book that can be read easily by children and a book that has such nuances and symbolism and depth and richness in the characters and in the story that even adults can find many major points of relatability and just falling in love with these stories. And also what Lewis does is something that I mentioned previously, which is he has a clear balance of action, description, and dialogue. This is great because it's something a lot of authors struggle with. They'll have way too much description and it'll be information overload and it'll feel like the story isn't going anywhere. They might just focus so deeply on action that you feel like the characters were never developed and it's just scene to scene to scene, and it can get overwhelming in the other sense of we're just constantly moving, never taking a second to breathe. And you need description as well to describe what's going on around all of these actions that are happening. And then also, if it's just dialogue, you might feel like the characters are talking a needless amount when there's no action and description and character build up to add up into them. So Lewis balances all of those really well, in my opinion. The next thing I want to talk about with a great lesson to learn from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is contrast. So comparing two different aspects of the story to see how they are different from each other and how those differences point out major truths about each other. So I'm going to go through a list of some things that are very clearly contrasting each other in the story. Toward the end of the book, they go from saving the statues to a desperate battle. It goes from this moment of hope and triumph when statues come to life to this moment of fear and panic when in this final battle there could be a lot of death. We go from Edmund's betrayal to his redemption. And in this redemption, he shows that he can be brave. He shows that he can support his siblings, fight for them as he's fighting for Narnia. And he's not just bitter toward the world that he's been placed in. We go from the wonderful, sacrificial Aslan to the deceptive White Witch. And these two foil each other because not only are their motivations different, but their ways they go about life are so different, and what they're fighting for in the end shows who is really wonderful, who is really sacrificial, giving up his life for others, and then who is trying to manipulate everything for her own advantage as the White Witch. There's a very clear contrast between winter and spring, and this gives a great mental picture to what's going on in Narnia to the reader. And then there's also a contrast between maturity and imagination and wonder. We talk about this a little bit between Susan and Lucy, and even though they're sisters, how differently they respond to being in Narnia. This goes much deeper. This goes to even their times back in London, where they're just talking through what happened, and they have such different perspectives on everything that they saw. And Edmund so deeply changes himself to go from a character that is sort of hateful toward Lucy and hateful toward the world that he's been put in Narnia, to then one, when we get later on down this series of books, you'll see in Prince Caspian has changed to have much more of an open mind, open imagination toward these things. And that's one of the things I'm talking about when I say that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe sets up the entire series and is a must-read for authors looking to dive into a lot of the intricacies and depths of the Narnia series. The last thing that I want to talk about is that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in my opinion, has an unforgettable story. There are many different moments that will stick with the reader because of how well they're described, not described over and over so that it's bogging the reader down, but clear, brief, very unique and wonderful descriptions that then set these scenes apart as ones that we've never heard of before, but you get a clear mental picture and they captivate and interest you because of what's going on with them. So some of these scenes are Aslan's sacrifice, Mr. Tumnus at the lamppost, the frozen statues at the witch's castle, the beavers and their meeting with the Pevensey siblings, the killing of the wolf where Peter gets to rise up and save his family at Aslan's camp, the coronation of the children to become kings, and then just the idea and thought of them living in this world of Narnia, growing old as kings and queens, experiencing these adventures until they finally return home in London and come to realize hardly any time has passed in their world. So guys, I hope you take some of these tips and tricks that we've learned from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and apply them to your writing. Now, don't copy Mr. Lewis and the excellent things that he has done, but learn and grow from the techniques that he used to then take your own style on these approaches and apply them then to your writings. So guys, I would love it if you could like this video and subscribe so that I could tell you guys more about the wonderful world of writing. And please consider commenting some of the things that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe influenced in your own writing style or what it has meant to you as a story. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great day. God bless.